So firstly, I wanted to talk through a little bit some context, because for Queensland, I think we regulate a little bit differently to the US, and also sort of to give you some context about what we were doing and how we were trying to do it. So Queensland is around 2.5 times the size of Texas. From a regulation point of view, more than half of our population lives outside the greater metropolitan area, which is quite significant in terms of the people that we serve as a community. And we look at a range of responsibilities around both environmental protection, species and ecosystem protection, and then also heritage protection. Predominantly what we're going to talk to you today about is environmental protection and regulation in Queensland in particular, as I said, a little bit different to the US. So we are the primary body that regulates environmental matters in Queensland, and we regulate anything from a very large mine. So we've got some of the biggest coal mines in the world, some of the biggest metalliferous mines, all the way through to somebody wanting to buy a turtle from a pet store and take it home. So the variance in our client set as opposed to the community is pretty extraordinary. We can deal with a casual relationship, which might be a one-off. Someone buys a turtle and the poor thing doesn't do so well and maybe never comes back, all the way through to a relationship with, say, BHP or Mitsubishi that might last 15 or 20 years. There's some stats up there about number of transactions and revenue. So we're probably smaller than some government departments. We do raise about $70 million in revenue a year though, and we do have a fair high volume of transactions. We've probably underestimated those transactions in particular, and we've cut out, I think, some of our waste tracking transactions. If you actually counted them line by line, I think they're substantially greater than that. That presented us some unique challenges though, and in particular in the way that our clients wanted to interact with us. So if you think about the concept of a BHP bulletin, and then you think about the concept of a Murray Pass sewage treatment plant at a caravan park or a resort, the way that they wanted to do business with us, the way they needed to get their permitting activities done, the way they wanted to get information from us was very, very different. So we had some challenges that we needed to respond to there. To give you a bit of a context of the vision, because we do cover such a broad range of things, we go everything from the reef, which is obviously fairly topical for us at the moment, but we also then look at the regulation as a set of environmental issues, and they can be anything as broad as a breach of a tailing structure to a discharge into a local waterway that causes a fish kill or the like, to somebody who might have, for example, decided to take a dingo home as a pet, or anything in between. So it's quite broad. Ben mentioned a little earlier what our driver for change was. So I've talked a little bit about our client set. So we've got really, and we talk about clients and customers in different ways, but our client set itself, there's about, I think, 5,000 of them, if you don't include the ones that are more casual users. So I'm talking about ones that come back time and time again. We also, though, have a client set or a customer set, which is the community. So we have a range of information that we need to provide them. The trouble that we were having historically was that we weren't able to provide them that information. So Kate's going to talk a little bit about our journey and where we came from, but our system that we had to begin with was fairly archaic. It was about 25 years old, and it was fairly ugly. And so we were quite struggling with the concept of not having good data, not being able to share the results of our successes with our community. As a consequence, them losing confidence in environmental regulation in Queensland, and then as a consequence that are actually impacting on the industries that we regulate. In Queensland we talk about the concept of the licence to operate, or the social licence to operate, and so our gas companies and our mining companies, the Shells and the BHPs of the world, were struggling as a consequence of our inability to be able to provide information to the community about the success of our regulation. So we needed to do a couple of things. We needed to be able to measure our performance, which was very, very important. We also needed to be able to communicate that performance and those outcomes to the people that we regulate, and also to the broader community. We thought that by doing all of those things collectively, it would enable us to increase community confidence in environmental regulation in Queensland, which was quite important to us, but also internally be able to increase staff satisfaction, because predominantly the people who work for us are people who associate and have strong feelings about the work that we do. I'm going to hand over to Kate now. She's going to talk a little bit more about our actual approach, and then I'll finish up at the end, which is more about our journey and where we're heading to next.
Thank you. So we took a considered approach to digital transformation. We didn't want to just take our current processes and digitise them. We wanted to build for EHP's digital future. So we wanted to take technology away from directing how we operated to making technology the supporting player in our day-to-day business. So as Anne mentioned, we looked at what we had, which is a 20-year-old database that hadn't been very well maintained. And then the usual business suspects of access databases, emails, and thousands of spreadsheets to help keep our business operating because our current system just didn't work for us. We then looked at what technology was available to help support the direction that we wanted to go. So we wanted cloud and we wanted mobility. And that led us to the Appian platform. So how did we get there? EHP self-funded its digital journey. So what I mean by that is we didn't get a special funding allocation from Treasury or from the departmental budget. The department as a whole got behind the concept, and we funded the project to deliver this process by not filling some positions across our offices across the state. So that created the capacity in our departmental budget to be able to fund our project. And we made the most of our workforce. So we combined key staff from across the state that really knew the inner workings of our business with our project team. We built their capability and their capacity, and we sort of broadened their skill set to help the project move along. We had monthly face-to-face meetings with our subject matter experts. So with a state the size of Queensland, 2.5 times the size of Texas, it was really important to us to give our subject matter experts and our project team the opportunity to meet face-to-face on a regular basis to discuss the project and the design to make sure that the end users really got what they wanted and our design was unambiguous. And we started early. So in some cases, we engaged with the business up to 18 months before we started development. Within the project, we created tribes. So the aim of the tribe was to embrace everyone's individual skill set to progress tasks quickly. So each tribe consisted of developers, data analysts, business analysts, communication officers and developers, along with data specialists. So this method actually helped us deliver whole packages of work within each tribe. So they could work through the entire process from start to finish without having to hand over bodies of work over the fence to the next team. So this created efficiency and increased the velocity of our development. We embraced data excellence. So we embraced that in two ways. We cleansed existing data to push into our new system. So at one point in time, we had up to 109 officers from our department operating across the state to cleanse our existing records around our customers and the locations that they operate, along with the permits that they hold. We also implemented some fairly strict data governance rules in our system. So Connect, which is what we've called our Appian system, has some embedded data rules in there to ensure that we collect data consistently and in a structured way. And we embraced process efficiency. So we took all of our existing processes and we mapped a journey. We mapped the journey for EHP. So every step that we took, every letter that we would send out, every notice, every email, and then we mapped the customer's journey as well. And we looked for duplications in those processes and some efficiencies that we could find. So in some cases, we've dropped processes from 27 steps to 5. What did that give us? Over 56 processes designed and developed in a 14-month period. So we've now hit about 2 years since we started this process, so we're up to over 90 processes that have been designed and implemented. So for the first time, EHP can actually engage with their customers in an online environment. So we can provide them with electronic invoices and online credit card payments. We also allow the customers to self-serve and self-manage their information. So they can log in, they can manage their own data, they can lodge applications online, and they can track the progress of that application. We also have the reporting function, which is EHP's favourite function in the system, I have to say. So as you might have been able to tell throughout my conversation, data is pretty important for us. So with the reporting function, the level of detail that we can see around our core activities has increased exponentially. The reporting function gives us a much more accurate picture about how our staff are performing, and it also allows us to deliver on the Queensland Government's commitment to community and industry around openness and transparency of our activities. So historically, we have had some visibility around this, but that's been based on the interpretation of baseline data. The reporting functionality now allows us to get a lot more granular level of detail about what's going on and provides us with a level of intelligence that we just previously haven't had about our operation. So we're now in the enviable position of being able to develop a business intelligence strategy for EHP, which really allows us to future-proof our regulatory activities. So I might hand back over to Anne just about our learnings and then the benefits that we got from our project.
So the first thing I wanted to talk through probably, and I'll start by giving a bit of a description of Kate and my roles respectively. So Kate was our project director. Her background is assessment, and what I mean by that is I think water chemistry and other things that Kate used to do for our business. My background, I'm Kate's boss, but my background is effectively environmental enforcement. So I used to be an environmental prosecutor, was an investigator at one point. I now take care of and are responsible for petroleum and gas regulation in Queensland and our overarching compliance strategy and policy. So then why I give that context, and particularly around our learnings, is that we really did change everything that we did. So not a single one of our processes, or our apps as you guys call them, that we dropped into the system remained the same. Every single one of them we changed. What that meant for us as a regulatory body is that everything else had to change as well. So every time we changed an application form, we had to go through a legislative process to amend that application form and gazette it and publish it before we could bring it live in the system. We also had to do a range of work on our website, and we've got, in Queensland, we have enterprise and other things that we need to do, so we can't have our own website, we've got to have a QG logo website. So we had to do a range of changes that we were not in control of with the Queensland Government website to time with the release of the material in our system as well. So we had to really coordinate quite an extraordinary amount of effort across our business and across government to time with our releases, and which was challenging at times. And I think someone once called, potentially sometimes Kate, but also me, that we were the bulldozers of the project. So you can't underestimate the amount of effort that it takes to be able to make sure that any of the blockers that you have through that process can be pushed out of the way. And so I think the perspective I'm trying to show to you here is that if we had have run this like a traditional IT project and sat it over here and said this is IT's problem and they're doing it, it actually never would have been able to work, because this was true business transformation. The IT was really a bolt-on. We were literally changing everything that we did, and it was really about the business and its journey. So we had our regular meetings, as Kate mentioned, we called them our business reference groups, where we pulled in people from our 15 regional offices across the state. I also chair a meeting called Campfire, which for my sins at the moment thankfully has dropped back to 2 times a week, every Wednesday and Friday morning at 9 o'clock. At one stage, when we were in the thick of a lot of releases, we were doing that once a day, every day. And that was not just about the IT part of the business, it was about our support areas, it was the people who run the website, it was the people who run our comms area, putting them all in the room together so that everybody knew what they needed to do for that particular release or that particular issue. The other one's complexity. So inevitably we didn't leave ourselves enough time to do anything. And so we would estimate the time to do something and it would never be enough, but we would have to hit it anyway, probably just because that's the type of people we are, I think, in some ways. And so we did deliver this project on time and on budget. We rebaselined once, and that was really an extension at the end, which was more about paperwork, because we had a project assurance process where we had to get an external auditor in, so we had to wait for that report to be delivered before we could close the project formally. So we, and to be honest, we didn't have enough money to extend it too much further, so there was some real pressure there in terms of delivery. The other thing which I want to talk a little bit about is executive involvement. So Agile is scary, particularly to government, And the process around budgeting and our CFO and how we allocated money, how we tracked our budget, that whole thing was scary to them. And so we had to actually spend quite a lot of time trying to educate them about the project, how it was operating, and that there was, in fact, governance that was strong in the project, and that it was delivering, and that it was on time, and that it was on budget, despite the fact that they weren't seeing the normal things that they would see from a traditional, older style waterfall IT project. That was probably actually one of our biggest challenges. Like, we were literally viewed with suspicion from the day we started till the day we finished, because nobody could quite believe it. So it's something that I think if we had our time again, we would have spent more time educating senior executive around project management methodology to smooth our runway through that process, because we were often at quite a pace. It made it difficult. We didn't have a lot of time to convince people that we were okay. One of the benefits of pace, though, is that by the time they worked out what was going on, we were finished. So probably didn't matter so much in the end. I was going to talk a little bit about benefits too. So one of the most obvious benefits is credit card payment. So it sounds ridiculous, but what we used to do to BHP Billiton and Shell in the past was they would lodge an application form that was paper-based. It was often quite big, which meant it couldn't be emailed because it was a sizable document. Some of them actually were literally boxes full of information. So they'd have to trot down the street and lodge it at our office. And if they did it in person, then we would take their credit card details then and put them in the machine and make a payment. However, if they could email it, and if it was smaller, the way the process would work is that they would put their name and phone number on the application form, and we would call them back to take their credit card payment over the phone. Which, as you can imagine, at one point I think I had a really quite cranky Shell client ring up and go, "I've been trying to make a credit card payment for 6 weeks and they're never there, can you sort this out?" So that used to give particularly our corporate clients a high level of frustration. So a very simple thing is that they can now pay online with a credit card. We've also got some applications now that you can get instantaneously. So instead of waiting for up to 30 business days, a person can log in, fill in the application process, sign their life away, pay with a credit card and get their application and their permit instantaneously. So we had some work done by the Queensland Competition Authority which gave us information that suggested that for every day of delay, we would cost a gas company up to $300,000. So there's some pretty powerful numbers around the time that we take to process an application, and that we need to make a decision in a reasonably timely way. We've seen benefits, so our return on investment is around about the 2.5 years. That's what we expect, and it's tracking pretty well at the moment. So we've released nearly $1 million of staff now to be reallocated into other areas of business. That equates to about between 10 and 12 FTEs in our language, or 10 or 12 officers. We expect by the end of 5 years we'll have around 45 staff repurposed. So we had a whole team of people that their job really was to manually shuffle paper. So there was some quite easy and tangible savings for us, which meant that, as Kate mentioned before, we were able to self-fund on the basis that the benefits that we got as a business dropped quite quickly and will continue to drop, I think, in the next 6 months. There is other more intangible things as well. Kate mentioned data, and that's certainly from our perspective. I think I mentioned earlier we have 12,000 sites. So that's a lot. We don't have 12,000 staff. Queensland's also a very big state. The majority of those quite large sites are also outside areas of mobile connectivity. So we've quite made good use of Appian's online-offline capability. And we also, though, through that process and through the data we are gathering, it's allowing us to make some much more informed decisions about risk and the risk that our clients present, which allows us to then direct resources to the places that need it the most. So in a reality where we can't visit those sites all the time, we need to have an ability to go, of those 12,000, which one is the most riskiest for us and which is the least, and where do we need to intervene? So I think the cool stuff for us and where we're heading in the future is more around some of the more advanced analytics and how at the moment we're doing that in a really kind of people-based way. And if we can automate some of that and again provide some more savings for us to be able to use those people in a little bit of a different way. I've talked a little bit about digital. I talked about waste tracking certificates before, but I'll talk a little bit about the significance of that as well. So it seems like a simple thing, but we have some quite nasty waste, as does everybody in Queensland, and our ability to be able to understand the movement of that waste is actually quite significant. So previously we had a 5-copy form, so they all had different colours, and each part of a person in the process had to fill out their carbon copy part of the 5-copy form, and then each person had to submit that part of that document into the department. We would then scan it. We then have somebody sit there and check to make sure the information's correct. The people who are filling out the forms are generally truck drivers who, some of them don't have the greatest grasp of the written language, which means there's often a bit of trouble in terms of trying to understand exactly what they've written on the form. And we had a whole team dedicated to doing that. Our backlog used to sit at around about 40,000 forms at any given time. At times it would get up to 100,000 if we were busy. And so what that effectively meant is that we didn't have access to that data. So we'd have a problem that would come up, we'd know a person's in non-compliance, we want information about what they were doing, and we were 3 months behind on the waste tracking certificate, so we couldn't actually get the information. So now we actually have real-time data, which is actually quite extraordinary and powerful for our business. It allows us to make decisions and allows us to intervene much earlier than what we ever were before.
Quick question.
Yep.
What's the backlog now? Is there a backlog?
The backlog, because we're still transitioning people across, backlog's about 10,000, I think. It's the lowest it's been for, I think, well, at least my memory since I've been in charge of that function. So we've also, it's been surprising the uptake we've had, particularly because we haven't forced uptake, we've made it voluntary to move to the online system. Some of our littler guys have been our biggest promoters of the move, so they love it. For whatever reason, a truck driver, they always have iPhones and they seem to be able to use them. So they actually prefer that than having to do the whole form process. So it's been quite good. We've only been live with that functionality since September, and we've got, I think, 20% uptake without really doing too much work yet, if that makes sense, in that particular sector. The other thing which was important to us, I talked about the fact we had 15 regional offices before. So consistency, and in any kind of organisation that is distributed in a geographical way, you've got offices that are sometimes 6 or 7 hours apart. Even to fly between them is a 2.5-hour flight. So how we got consistency in those offices from a decision-making point of view was quite important for us. So we'd get a coal mine approved out of the Emerald office, we'd get a large gas operation approved out of the Brisbane office, and the conditions on them would be wildly different. And so then I'd have the clients walking in the door and going, well, I want that deal. Why didn't you give me that deal? Why have I got this deal? And so we'd have some quite difficult conversations around that, and there's no real explanation for that from our point of view. They should expect consistency of us and we should deliver it. So one of the things with the workflow and what Appian's been able to deliver for us is consistency in that decision-making process. All of our conditions are in there, people have to select from them. The workflow itself is consistent. They need to go through each of the decision-making criteria in a quite structured way that's consistent with the legislation, but also is actually improving the decisions that they're making. And so that's some of the more intangible benefits from our point of view, which are quite strong. So in the past, I think, we spent a lot of time really actually going back and auditing and trying to ensure consistency in other ways. Now, simply with the implementation of this platform, it's allowed us to shift quite substantially improvement in terms of how we make our decisions. And then we're really kind of tinkering around the edges now rather than dealing with quite significant consistency issues. The next step for us, which is pretty interesting, and I think Kate and I are pretty excited about next year. So we're now looking at, it's useful that there are other Queensland Government departments that also run the Appian platform. We're now looking at passing information between us to enable us to get a better understanding of risk, and in particular financial risk. So we have some quite significant issues in Queensland at the moment with commodity prices not being particularly strong on what they have been in the past. That introduces a real extra focus on the financial viability of some of our resource sector companies. A lot of the metalliferous mines quite commonly will go into care and maintenance and in and out as the commodity price fluctuates. But what we're seeing is quite depressed commodity prices for a period. So we're now starting to see companies actually go in our, I'm not sure what you call it here, but external administration is what we call it. and being unrehabilitated, which ends up with quite a large liability to the state and hence which gets passed on to taxpayers. So we're now looking at the data that we're getting from our system, we're now looking at data we can get from other systems within government and looking at ways to improve our understanding of financial risk and trying to understand the precursors of companies that get themselves into that position so that we know as early as we can to ensure that we can intervene and make sure that the outcome is as good as it can be from our perspective. We're also looking at the concept of creating public servants of the future, which does sound a little bit funny and a little bit culty, but what we mean by that is that it is actually something that's very different. And so we've actually got a reasonably young workforce, demographically speaking, and that brings its own challenges, but it also brings its own opportunities. So we are looking at ways to harness the younger generation within our workforce. We're looking at ways we have them, some of them we're having as guests on particular committees and on particular leadership structures. We're also looking at hiring. We haven't come up with a word for it yet. It was millennial, the app guy, whatever. But we're looking at actually having a deliberate recruitment and retention strategy around skill sets that historically wouldn't have been part of the Department of Environment and Heritage. And acknowledgement that all of our staff need to be upskilled in this particular area. That it's not, if once you see the pace of change from a digital point of view and from technology generally, and you see the pace of change from the community, what they expect from us, the pace of change from our clients and what they expect from us, it is a different way of doing business. And if we don't change, then we'll never be able to keep anybody that we deal with satisfied in any way, shape or form. The other thing that Kate mentioned before is that we have actually been investing our staff in terms of business process mapping and understanding the business process, which has been something quite different for us. So we went, when we looked at baselining our business processes, as everyone tells you should do, we made a deliberate decision to skip that step, which I know everyone will probably shut up, but our problem is that we had so many of them. If we had have actually tried to map all our business processes and they were all so different and none of them were consistent, then we probably still would have been doing it now. And so none of our officers were consistent in how they did anything that they did, which is why when Kate said we started in some cases up to 18 months before the build, because we had to herd 500 cats about how they were doing a particular process and get an agreement around one process. And so that was probably one of our biggest challenges, and I think one of the things that we probably have done okay, and I've been pretty at least happy with where we're at in terms of releasing functionality to the business and not having a complete chaos or uproar or people losing it. The other thing we're looking at, we've started a project called Project Innovation. So we're asking and encouraging the staff to pick a process and improve it. And so the last round that we did, we had 241 ideas from the staff, and that's in fact how we're now building our next year's work program. So we're running a process, we're getting them to do 3-minute videos and giving them an opportunity to pitch in a very friendly Shark Tank kind of way to senior executive and giving them that ability to be part of the process and be part of the solution to their problems. That's been going really, really well. The other thing that we're doing, which is probably a little bit different to others, I think, and Kate and I have been commenting a little bit this week about how we're business orientated, like we're business people. I don't have an IT bone in my body, and neither did Kate prior to this. And Wayne and a couple of our guys are here. They will know that I'm always going, so can you just explain that to me in plain English? Because I didn't understand what you said. And so I think we've trained them to speak in a language that we understand, but at the same time, we've probably trained them to speak in a way that we understand too. But we are very much changing the way that we deliver our business and look at IT. So we've got a shared service provider model. So our IT sits over there somewhere and serves 6 government departments. They wanted to be part of the project to start with. We got 3 months in and they went, oh, we don't know about this. We reckon you're on your own. So we actually did this entirely separate to our IT service provision. So we engaged Appian partner providers. We engaged some technical project management expertise from another consultant called Business Aspect, and that's how we did our project delivery. But our project board was almost entirely business. Our business reference groups were business. Our structure was business. So our next bit really is the public bit, which is kind of exciting for Kate and I think. So we, for the first time, it sounds odd, but so I mentioned before that we had 12,000 sites, they all have a permit. Up until now, we've never actually been able to publicly release that information, despite the fact that people had a right to it at law. So to get a copy of a permit, you used to have to give us a call and tell us what you wanted, and we'd go out the back and rifle through the files and find the right permit and give you a copy. So for the first time, as of February, which is why it's embedded in my brain, as of February, we've actually pushed that information out to the public so they can self-serve, which is a pretty big deal. And as Kate mentioned, we had to do a lot of cleansing of our data to get to that point, which is probably the scary bit for us. We also, though, now want to look at self-service of information and pushing of information. So we have a lot of community interest in things like coal mines, as everybody does, in the gas sector, as everybody does. We want to be able to give people information before they ask for it. So we're now looking at taking the information and that we now have through, I suppose, the rollout of the Appian platform and now what our pretty database looks like, and being able to actually share that information in a way that we've never really done before. So that's, I think, our focus for next year, in addition to getting a handle on all the pretty new data we do have and how that can actually drive our business. The other thing that we'll do, which is going to be cool and our industry is not going to like it, what you can also get under law in Queensland is information around compliance and enforcement histories. And so for the first time, we'll be proactively providing that information as well, so that people will be able to self-serve in relation to an industry profile or a company profile about how they perform from an environmental point of view, which is a strong lever for us to pull from the point of view of our compliance framework. Because a lot of these companies are publicly listed, they have shareholders. The last thing that they want to have happen is any kind of damage to their external reputation. And the big ticket thing for us, which is probably underpins everything that we've done, is that we now understand the concept of environmental values, which are the thing that our legislation protects. And an environmental value is, for example, the ability to drink water. So historically, we wouldn't have been able to really tell you what our activities had an impact on that particular value, so whether we improved it or made it worse. So for the first time ever, it's going to change the way that we communicate with Queenslanders, because we'll be able to say, that particular river system, we did that and that and that, and it's made a change in this way and it's positive, and that water quality in that system is better as a consequence. So that's pretty powerful for us in terms of the way that we communicate our performance. And if I go back to one of the earlier slides where we started with, was about we wanted to be able to communicate with people how we perform, and so it's enabled us to do that. I think I'm done. So thank you very much.
We've got just a few minutes here. If there are any questions, we can use the mic if needed, but we might not need it. Are there any questions? We'll use the mic because it's needed. So I can start something off unless anyone else wants to be first to jump in. Any questions? Yes, sir.
What was your learning curve in getting up to speed on Appian and bringing new people up to speed on Appian in terms of how it works and being able to code and deliver it?
We spent probably the first 6 months, I would say, playing around a little bit, if I put it that way. We then worked out that we probably didn't have the right skills that we needed, and we changed pretty quickly and onboarded people. And as Kate talked about, we changed our structure of our teams a little bit, so we brought in the tribe concept, and it was almost like an overnight change in relation to the velocity of development and how fast we were able to release new material. So, you know, in hindsight, we probably could have made that a lot faster if we had have known what we knew now. But 6 months is probably not that bad, and thankfully we didn't burn a lot of coin. So I think that's the other benefit, is that we didn't spend a ton of money. You know, and in a scenario where there's been stuff in the press recently in our little neck of the woods in Queensland, where there's a similar IT project for a local government doing almost exactly the same thing that we did, and they're $60 million over budget and they haven't delivered something. So we spent a fraction of that. And so even though we had that 6 months of playing around, it didn't cost us a lot of money. So I think hindsight, we would have done it differently, but in the scheme of things, it didn't cost us, so that's, I think, quite good.
So you mentioned shared services, that the IT services. I'm from Canada, so familiar with that concept. We have the same thing. Did you have to overcome a preferred vendor list that you're supposed to choose from? And how did you manage that if that was the case?
Yeah, so we actually departed from our procurement process, which nobody ever loves you when you do that. And so we were also one of the first to go cloud in the Queensland government. Does anyone ever want to go first with anything? Not really, and it was painful. But I think it took us, and that was probably some of the stuff I said earlier about better information and better sharing with the executive. We were quite fortunate at that point that we had a very strong Director General, who was the leader of our organisation, who was actually pretty tech savvy. And he was good, and he was a very strong advocate of the project. He was happy to sign off of the departure from the procurement process that's standard, and got us, and happy, I suppose, with what we'd done to assess risk associated with contracting and whatever else and kick off. I think government generally is a bit better placed now for that, and I wouldn't underestimate the amount of time that can take, because we were months later than what we wanted to be in getting through that initial procurement process. And as I said, our IT were quite funny. So to start with, they sort of wanted to be part of the party. But after about 3 months, they were like, gee, yeah, we don't know about this. You guys go off and do stuff and let us know how you went. So I think once they got to that point where they acknowledged that they probably didn't have the expertise to do what we wanted to do, it kind of made things a bit easier. But to start with, it was very difficult.
Does the minister have visibility of the success?
Yeah, absolutely. So this project actually started with a pitch to the minister, so I had to get his sign-off before we could do it. So we've changed ministers since then, but new ministers done press releases and stuff when we've released particular functionality. So heavy engagement from both our executive and our ministerial level.
Anyone else? I'm interested in how you are reaching your customers, your external community with Appian, just in terms of interfaces. Are you using sites? Are you embedding functionality? What are you doing?
So currently we're not using sites. That's probably our next step in our program next year. So at the moment we're still on Tempo, and that's how we've started engaging our customers. So I think Anne mentioned earlier that waste tracking went in September, so that was probably our first release. We've released a significant amount of functionality since then, and all of the feedback that we've had from customers has been extremely positive around just intuitive, easy to use. Like, they've been very happy. We're quite fortunate. I think we've not received any negative feedback from our customers.
And we didn't really give them much training either, so all we've done is a couple of videos. So we've got a guy who, for whatever reason, we've discovered in his downtime likes to create music and videos and stuff. So he's done a ton of basically self-help videos that we've just dropped on the website. So that's pretty much all we've done.
Yeah, they've been very positively received.
That's great. Any final question? Not, I will say thank you very much. We really appreciate it. It was wonderful, and thank you for coming such a long way to share your story with us.